The Secrets of Doctor Who is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, episode 184.
One day, I shall come back.
That's it. I've been renewed.
Is when a Time Lord's body wears out, he regenerates.
I'm a Time Lord. I'm not a human being. I walk in eternity.
Braveheart.
Change, my dear, and it seems on a moment too soon.
Unlimited rice pudding.
Physician healers. Wearing a bit thin. Fantastic.
I am Scottish. I can complain about things.
Ta-da! Ooh. Should be fine.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series, Doctor Who. And today we're discussing The Time of the Angels. It's a first of a two-parter featuring the 11th Doctor and Amy Pond and River Song, but we'll get to that in a second. Joining me today on the panel are Father Cory Sticha. Hi, Father Cory.
How's it going?
Very well, thanks. And Jimmy Akin. Hello, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Folks, if you could do us a big favor, if you're a fan of The Secrets of Doctor Who, you can help us out by writing a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast from and sharing the podcast with your friends. That helps us grow the community. You do not know how much that helps. And so we really do appreciate it when we get reviews. And, of course, we also like the nice things you say about us. But that's not the primary reason we like it. Well, at least that's what I'm telling you. So we're talking today about the first of a two-parter. This week we're talking about Time of the Angels, and the next week we'll be talking about the second part called Flesh and Stone. And this is a two-parter that features the return of River Song, which is interesting. This was a creation of Stephen Moffat during Russell T Davies' time in the Silence in the Library two-parter there. And so River Song is back now that Moffat is the showrunner, as well as something else Stephen Moffat created, his villains, the Weeping Angels. So I find it interesting, just to start off, that when Russell T Davies started the revival of the series in 2005, he brought back classic monsters right away. I mean, the first episode had the Autons, and there was something else, too, the Autons and the other big blobby thing.
The big blobby thing was the intelligence that controls the Autons.
Right. Okay, yeah. And then he brings back the Daleks, fairly quickly too. Whereas so far, Moffat, this is only the third story. Third story, since he's not reviving the series, but he's going right into new monsters that he's created.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was interesting.
And he's going to his characters, not even like ones that Russell T Davies. Of course, he wrote Blink, right? I can't remember.
He wrote Blink, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So he basically created the Weeping Angels, and then he brought them back, right away.
And the Weeping Angels are widely regarded as the most recognizable monsters of the New Who era.
Mm-hmm.
They're the closest thing we have to a New Who Daleks or Cybermen.
Right. Yes.
Maybe sad to say this is, in my opinion, the high point of the Weeping Angels, because it's all downhill from here. And not just because the gravity of the ship turns off.
So I had a couple of thoughts about that. First, though, I wanted to say that I also like something else about this is the crash of the Byzantium. When River Song first shows up in Silence in the Library and she tries to sync diaries with the Doctor, which he doesn't even have a diary yet that he's carrying to sync with her. But she's flipping through her diary and she's going, "Oh, it's early days. Have we done Crash of the Byzantium yet?" and now we get to see Crash of the Byzantium, which is apparently the next time she and the Doctor meet.
Right.
So I like that we just had a little bitty reference, which now gets paid off. In terms of the Weeping Angels, there are really only 3 stories. I mean, I know, and I think the Weeping Angels, like other villains, but in a special way, lose the more you see them.
Yes.
With the Weeping Angels, less is more. And the edge gets progressively taken off them the more times you defeat them and so forth. And they're hampered in a way that the Master is not, because they can't talk for themselves. And the Daleks, even the Daleks can talk for themselves in a way the Weeping Angels can't. So we can't have updates on their plans. So in a way, they're a kind of one-trick, two-trick pony, and that's it.
Right.
But there's really only 3 stories where the Weeping Angels are the primary antagonists. There's Blink, there's this 2-parter, and then there's Angels Take Manhattan. And they do appear a couple of other times as like background throwaway monsters as part of a crowd or something, but they're not the primary antagonists. And so really there is only these 3 stories. So I think the reputation of them progressively losing is something that has to be understood with some context, because it's not like they've been dramatically overused.
Right.
I mean, you could say maybe they've been a little bit overused. I would say they haven't really been overused at all. It's just there are some flaws with some of the individual episodes that could have been fixed. In Angels Take Manhattan, the biggest thing that gets everybody angry about that episode is the Statue of Liberty is an angel.
Yes.
Which makes no sense.
Right.
And we can talk about why when we get to that episode. But if they had just not done that, people wouldn't hate on the episode in the same way. And I think the Angels' reputation would be a little different today than it is.
Right. It's like they have to continually, every time they show any monster or villain, the more they show it, the more they have to introduce a new element, something new we haven't seen before. And what that does is eventually sort of degrades it, because it just becomes, whereas a villain that can speak, like the Master, can change, can be different and new. But
have a new plan besides touch people and send them back in time. Or in this episode, snap their necks.
Right. I agree. I agree that but I agree with Father Cory. This is the high point. I think this is probably the best episode. In some ways, I compare this to the Aliens franchise, where you have the first movie is one alien or a couple of angels, and it's really scary. And then in the second one, it's scary in a different way because there's lots of them. And you have a whole crew of soldiers who have to fight against them.
And Stephen Moffat apparently deliberately modeled this 2-parter after Aliens, after the sequel to Alien. And I agree, this is the Weeping Angels version of Aliens. But for me, because I didn't like Aliens, I thought those Space Marines totally deserved to die.
Game over, man.
The original Alien is the one that works for me, and the original Blink is the one that works for me. And although I do like Time of the Angels and Flesh of Stone, for me, Blink is the high point.
Okay. Well, let's get into this episode. We'll talk more about some of the details as we go along. We start with a guy standing in a beautiful field with a smudge of lipstick on his face, and it's a security guard who's got the hallucinogenic lipstick, which is apparently River Song's trademark. We hear from this guy who's in a tuxedo who walks up to the security guard. And
this is the first time we've had hallucinogenic lipstick, by the way.
Yes. We will see that again. The opening, I find, is very James Bond. It feels very much like a James Bond spy movie. We don't see River's face as she, breaks into this secure room, and she has a pistol that she turns into a welding torch, and so on and so forth. And then we cut from that to 12,000 years later with the Doctor and Amy in a church that's apparently now a museum, as the Doctor is walking around judging the exhibits.
Called the Delirium Archive.
Yes, which is that's a kind of a fun name. I want to go to that museum. And Amy's kind of it feels like Amy's like one of my kids. It was like, dragging. Do we have to go through another exhibit? I want to go to get. Well, my kids would say ice cream, and she says, I want to go to a planet now, like you promised me. It's very like parent dragging kid through the museum feel to it. But the Doctor says this is the resting place of the headless monks, is one of the reasons why this is a great museum, which we'll see later, won't we?
Eventually, when a good man goes to war, yeah.
Yeah. And then Amy says she realizes that museums are how the Doctor keeps score, which is kind of funny because he's walking around going, wrong, like judging all of the labels on the exhibits, and then says, oh, that's one of mine. I love that bit. So, and that's when they come upon the home box, which he explains is like a black box on an airplane, except it's in a spaceship, and it's designed to, when the spaceship crashes, go home, find its way home.
We should have that technology. I mean, we would know what happened to the Malaysia airliner if we had that. I predict within 20 years if we want, within 20 years we can definitely have home boxes.
Well, you think about it. If it crashes in the ocean, it pops out of a door, and it'll be like a drone with float to the surface and then vroom, right along the water.
Yeah,
or at least float to the surface and turn on the satellite transponder to let everybody know where it is.
Yeah, it definitely should. I thought that it looks like the Pandorica. Am I off base? That's just in my memory.
It also looks like a Borg cube or any number of other cubes.
Oh, okay. Because of the interior, it had that weird shape in it. I thought that's what the Pandorica looked like. I didn't go to look because it just was going from memory.
I think the Pandorica it doesn't have that carved out round shape. It just has a circle on the outside.
Okay.
If I remember correctly. What I liked about the home box is the writing on it.
Yes.
Because it has what the Doctor interprets as Old High Gallifreyan, which looks fairly consistent with the Time Lord writing we've seen in Classic Who. But in New Who, they have this circular writing for that Gallifreyan is written in. And so apparently there's been a shift in the script that's used to write Gallifreyan between the old High Gallifreyan script and the modern Gallifreyan script, and that explains the difference. And I like that they include the older style writing here as a visual reference. It's Stephen Moffat doing his continuity geek stuff, and they don't make a big deal out of it. They just say, oh, old High Gallifreyan. And the fans who happen to notice the difference in the two scripts can make the inference.
Right. And as apparently they had old High Gallifreyan in Classic Who a few times.
Yes.
Yeah, that they used, which looked basically like Greek, like the Greek alphabet in some cases.
Well, unless you read the Greek alphabet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was like sigma and theta in like those letters.
Yeah, there were a couple of letters they referenced.
Right. But so this old High Gallifreyan message that was engraved into it 12,000 years ago was from River, and the Doctor waxes poetic about the ways that old High Gallifreyan, just the sound of it could conquer planets. And then Amy asks, "Well, what does it say?" And it says, "Hello, sweetie," which is it's like your wife leaving you a message on a sticky note. So
very obviously, yeah,
yes,
because they're still playing coy with us about River as the Doctor's future wife,
right? Well, and we'll see her do this again with she'll carve something into a cliff face.
Yes,
later on.
And every time she meets him, she says, "Hello, sweetie."
Yes.
Yep.
Until she doesn't recognize him as Peter Capaldi, and he gets to say the line.
Yes. Which again, we talked about that, and that was a great episode. So River is back 12,000 years ago. River's cornered by the man in a tux and his guards at an airlock, and she tells him that based on what's in the ship's vault, the ship won't reach its destination, i.e., the Weeping Angel that's in the vault. And the TARDIS arrives just in time for her to blast open the airlock and float through space into the Doctor's arms,
because
a la Princess Leia in The Last Jedi. And
no, much better than that.
Yeah, I know.
But it's also, I love it. I love how the TARDIS ends up showing up at the right time, where the Doctor's patched into this home box, gets the video feed from this event, and oh, by the way, come to these coordinates.
Which includes the word acorn.
I like how they incorporate things like acorn into the alphanumeric system in the future. That's not the only time we see that. And she says, "Oh, and I'll need an oxygen corridor." So there is an explanation for why she doesn't asphyxiate while she's between the ship and the TARDIS.
Although the TARDIS appears after she's in. Never mind. I'm not gonna nitpick on that.
So if we're going to pick on that, actually, you don't immediately die from explosive decompression. It's much more horrible than that. It takes a while.
Yep.
Yes. So the TARDIS does arrive just in time for her to float through into the Doctor's arms, and the Starliner, the Byzantium, flies away, and she says, "Follow that ship," and so they do. River shows that she knows how to fly the TARDIS. She mentions turn on the blue stabilizers, which he calls them the blue boringers because they turn off the noise, the shaking of the ship.
They get rid of the turbulence.
Yeah, and then she lands the ship without it making the noise, which I have to say Matt Smith does a good job of imitating with his mouth. You know, the materialization noise. And this is the point where River says that's what it makes that noise because you fly with the brake on, which is great. And he says, "I like that noise. It's a wonderful noise." So and I wonder, was that controversial with fans? Did fans like get a little upset that they turned that iconic noise into just a quirk of the Doctor?
In my opinion, it's kind of been forgotten about, to be honest with you. It's kind of just seen as a throwaway line. The same thing with the blue stabilizers. It's all just kind of thrown away. Yeah. Isn't this cute? She knows how to fly the TARDIS better than the Doctor does.
Yeah, we also get it established she learned to fly the TARDIS from the very best. And as Matt Smith is about to take credit for that, she says, "Pity you weren't there that day."
Yes. Oh, man, put in his place. It is a little fun to have like someone who's sort of the equal of the Doctor in this case, you know, in many ways, who can, you know, hold her own with him and kind of put him in his place.
In this respect, she's very much like Romana was. Yes. Because Romana back in Classic Who was another time lady who actually scored higher than the Doctor on her tests at school, and she could do exactly the same thing. She would pilot the TARDIS better than the Doctor or things like that. I mean, this is a very Romana type thing.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. So they get to the planet, and the Doctor does here's where he shows his skill is a little higher than Rivers. She wants to do an environment check, and so he's like, "Oh yeah," opens the door, sticks his head out, goes, "It's nice out." And then she's trying to like look up where they are. He's like, "We're on this planet, Alfalfa Matraxis, 7th planet, oxygen-rich atmosphere, toxins in the soft band, 11-hour day, and chance of rain later," which is a lot of fun. So then he's just going to leave her there. She walks out the door, and he goes to fly off. Until Amy bugs him into staying.
Yeah, and the reason for that they establish is because he knows Rivers his future, and he doesn't want to, he's trying to avoid contaminating his timeline with information about his future.
Right, and that's where Amy says, "Can you run away from that?" And he says, "I can run away from anything I like. Time's not the boss of me," which is fun.
Which for a Time Lord is kind of true, yeah.
Yes.
Sort of.
Yes. So they go outside because he had promised Amy that they would visit a planet because they'd been to the London in space, and then they'd been to
that's it. They've been to London in space,
and then they went to London in the Blitz. So they really haven't gone very far. So she wanted to go to a planet, and so this is the planet. So she kind of bugs him into letting her go outside, and then we see that the Byzantium has crashed conveniently into an empty, abandoned temple, so that the statues that we see won't look out of place at first.
Yep.
Which, you know, that's a convenient little bit there. And that's when we get these soldiers who start beaming down around them.
Actually, before that, we have River try to sync diaries again, and this time we get a reference to, have we done the Bone Meadows yet?
Yes.
And I want to know what the Bone Meadows are now.
Yeah.
Also, since he's met her at the end of her life, he refers to her as Professor River Song to Amy, and she says, "Ooh, I'm going to be a professor one day." So apparently at this point, she's only a doctor, but hasn't yet been appointed a professor at a university.
Right. So, so this is when the soldiers start beaming down around them, transmatting in, including Father Octavian, Bishop Second Class, with 20 clerics under his command. When Amy asks about that, he says, "It's the 51st century. The church has moved on."
And let's be clear. I think the assumption obviously would be the Church of England.
Yes, they're clearly they're Anglicans based on what we later learn.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, we do see them again later. So
yeah. I was a little bugged that, I mean, and not in a bad way. It's just a little annoying that they consistently refer to Father Octavian as father when he's a bishop.
Yeah.
Right.
And they don't refer to any of the priests as father. And it's like, okay, I get that they're from the 51st century, so honorific nomenclature can change in that time. Like calling someone Shepherd Book for example,
Right, yeah.
instead of pastor book, when shepherd and pastor mean the same thing. But it just felt odd, given that I'm from the 21st century, not the 51st century, and they didn't really set it up. It feels more like a writing mistake than a deliberate choice.
Right. By the way, Father Octavian is played by Ian Glenn, who folks who've seen Game of Thrones will recognize as Ser Jorah, which was, I think, about a little after this aired, I think. This was 2010, and so I think the first season of Game of Thrones might have been a little after this, but somewhat contemporaneous. But a great actor, great character.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, also wanted to mention, and I think this is a deliberate choice. I mean, clearly is, that the 51st century church has this military thing going where they're carrying weapons and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly that is not the case today. And in the Catholic Church in particular, clerics are not allowed to carry arms in that way.
Not in combat. That is correct.
Not in combat, yeah. And I mean, for self-defense, but not, you can't serve as a soldier. And it explicitly in canon law says no to that. But this is a deliberate choice there. And especially, it's even more ironic for the Church of England in certain ways.
Yeah.
Right.
That it's gone military.
It's almost like the religious military orders of the Crusading era.
Yeah, it's like the Knights Templar.
Right. Interesting. So this is also the point where we're told, now that this is what they're dealing with is a weeping angel. The Doctor until this point did not know, and this is going to be a big point of concern for the Doctor. They talk and say that the goal here is to break into the catacombs under the temple in this cliff face in front of them. The ship crashed on the temple that's on this cliff way above them. And they're going to break into the catacombs that are there under the temple and climb up through the tunnels to get to the angel in the hold of the ship and neutralize it. So we've now established what our end game
overall
is
goal is. Yeah. Meanwhile, Amy is trying to figure out who River is.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find interesting, I don't think the actresses knew
yes.
at this point that, I'm actually your mom.
Right.
But in hindsight, River's really keeping it cool that she's not betraying any sign that she knows Amy is her mom.
That's
I was
right.
Gonna say, I wonder if this was even conceived by that point, no pun intended, that they would make that twist late, in a couple of seasons. I wonder if that was even thought of at that point.
I don't know. But obviously the wife thing is thought of because Amy really lands a dart right in the bullseye and says, she's Mrs. Doctor from the future, isn't she? and Matt Smith doesn't know, so he ducks the question.
That's right. So they salvage a bit of video from the surveillance footage in the hold of the ship of the Weeping Angel. It's a 4-second video of the Weeping Angel statue on loop. And River says it was dormant and dug up, and it's been in private collectors' hands for like 100 years, I think she said, for a long time, waiting.
The angel.
Right. And compared to the ones that were on Earth from Blink, the Doctor says those were scavengers barely able to fight, but this one is a Weeping Angel at its deadliest, most powerful, most malevolent abilities.
So that explains all the new abilities it has.
Yes.
Yep.
And this is also the creepiest part of both episodes for me. This scene where Amy gets stuck in this trailer with this looping video of the angel, and we get the angel starts moving in the video loop. And that's an important point. Is this is not a live feed of the hold. This is a recorded 4-second loop
from something that happened before the crash.
Yes,
and yet the angel's not only able to move on the screen, but also affect the surroundings around the screen with keeping the monitor from being able to turn off, keeping the door from being open, the lights flickering, all that stuff.
And then it begins to come through the screen at her, so to become present in the room. And all of this just, I remember the first time I watched it, and even this time I watched it, this always just creeps me out. I have to sit with my back against the wall. I mean, this is the idea of something about, I don't like having it paused on screen. Intellectually, I know that it's not real, but man, this hits at some deep, dark lizard part of my brain.
I can think of as the movie Poltergeist. There, here.
Right.
I think this scene is effectively creepy. I've seen far creepier, so this doesn't push my buttons the way some other things have. I mean, Let's Scare Jessica to Death. Wow, is that creepy? But this is, it is effectively creepy. One of the things I like about this, and this one just goes by very subtly. After the initial Blink episode, fans immediately started saying, "How can you defeat a weeping angel?" And we see the way they do it in that episode, which is to get the angels around the TARDIS and then dematerialize the TARDIS so that the angels are all facing each other, so they're all quantum locked as statues. But immediately fans started saying, how else can you do this? And for example, how can you compensate for your need to blink? And Amy, without anyone suggesting it to her and without even talking about it, starts doing it. She closes one eye at a time. Yes. So she starts blinking one eye at a time to get that lubrication on the eyeballs, but not without losing visual track of the angel on the screen. That's nice that they incorporated that. Another thing that they incorporated that fans came up with was, let's point a camera at a weeping angel so it's always being observed. And they deal with that here, too, because now the angel is able to manipulate through the camera, since this is a powerful one, not just a scavenger barely surviving. It's able to manipulate things through the camera as well. So they're dealing with that also. And that's neat.
Yeah, and the Doctor, meanwhile, is got this book written by a madman about the weeping angels that he's trying to, at first he's just trying to, read it and find out how to defeat the angel in the hold. But then it becomes an important tool that he's trying to use to defeat the angel that's in the room with Amy. Mm-hmm. And he realizes that which holds the image of an angel becomes itself an angel. And that's an important point. And it's an interesting new ability of the angels, like mentioned before, that to escape from being quantum locked, that they get things to look at them and to record them. And that helps them get around that quantum lock. Amy's the one who comes up with a solution, by the way. Both River and the Doctor are stymied trying to get in there. But Amy's solution is pause the video on the glitch at the end of the loop. So at the loop, there's static on the screen. So by pausing the video on the static, the image of the angel is reduced or eliminated, is gone. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, she starts rubbing at her eye as if it's irritated, and sand comes out. Foreshadowing.
Yeah, and the Doctor is telling her, and we hear this later in the episode as well, don't look it in the eyes, because if you look it in the eyes, it can get into your retina. Your retina's holding the image, and that's what causes problems for Amy later on. People have pointed out, of course, that in the original Blink, they do look the angel directly in the eyes, face to face. Right. You can again explain that as that was just a scavenger, but
right.
Some people have been critical of that and have not seen that or not spotted that explanation.
Right.
I found it interesting that the eyes are so important.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it works on a level of logic, but on a level of dream logic, it does, because eyes are, if you look at horror fiction, eyes are extremely important. A villain's eyes monster's eyes will sometimes glow, for example. And eyes are just extremely important for humans for evolutionary reasons, because they're our most vulnerable point, or one of our most vulnerable points. And they're incredibly important because vision is the sense through which humans primarily navigate the world, unlike smell for dogs or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And also, eyes tell you something about what your opponent is thinking, because if you're human, you know about gaze tracking, and you can tell if its gaze is not on me, it's not as much of a threat as if it's looking directly at me. And so eyes are very important for humans, and they're tightly plugged into our fear response. And so that don't look it in the eyes thing is really hard for us, because we're wired to look at things in the eyes to try to read their minds. And so I think just for evolutionary reasons, this makes sense in a kind of dream logic way. In terms of horror, in terms of biology, don't look at it in its eyes doesn't make any sense. But in terms of horror logic, it does work.
I think it's interesting too that they explain later that this is part of the evolutionary aspects of, the way the evolutionary tools that the angels have developed, in the sense of looking at it quantum locks it so that it can't attack you, but you have to look at it, and therefore if you look at it in the eye, you're becoming its prey, or you're becoming susceptible to it in another way. So even though that's a weapon against it, it turns that weapon back against you. It's kind of an interesting twist on that original, you have to look at it thing. So we find out that the hyperdrive in the Byzantium split on impact. The whole ship is flooded with radiation, which is bad for the people, but is good for the angels. That's what they sort of live on that. So in addition to time energy from displacing people through time, apparently they also live just on regular old radiation.
This particular kind of radiation.
Yes, right. Drive burn radiation, they said. Cracked electrons, gravity storms, etc. That all sounds very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So they go inside the catacomb. They blast their way in, and they find it's full of statues because it's the maze of the dead. It's like an underground city, which is, I like the design. It's a pretty cool design. And they throw this gravity globe, which is basically it's a
drone with a light on it.
Exactly.
And
it is like in the episode we just recorded, Planet of Evil, they had a drone that they called it like an opto something. It was a drone with a camera.
An oculoid or something, yeah.
Yeah, this is a drone with a light. It's just a drone, guys. No big deal.
No big deal. Yeah, exactly. And it floats up above them and lights up the whole thing. And they talk about how it's in some ways it's like the catacombs in Rome, where the Christians buried the dead, and in the ground, in the walls, and so it's others. Yeah, it's a little more creepy than that. Then we have Octavian and River have a little side conversation about not letting the Doctor know about River's status and that she was in prison and why. We'll find out later. They'll tell us that in these two episodes we find out that it's because she killed a good man who was a hero to many, and of course we'll find out all about that much later on in the next season, I think it is. So that's to come. But that becomes a huge plot point where Octavian is holding this over River's head, where, if you don't keep in line, I'm going to tell the Doctor about you. So two soldiers are sent off to explore a cave while they're getting ready to start climbing up. And in that cave, one of the soldiers, we hear stone scraping, which is an angel apparently moving out of his view that attacks him. And this is a problem I have with some of this, because wasn't it established that they're only stone, the angels are only stone when they're being looked at, and otherwise they're not stone?
This is a kind of disputed point.
Yeah.
Some people are of the opinion, some fans are of the opinion that we don't know what the angels are like when they're not quantum locked, and that they are definitely not statues when they are not quantum locked. And so you don't know what they're like when they're not being observed. And that's a big part for some fans of what makes them mysterious and intriguing. And so some fans really hated that the angels in this two-parter are portrayed as being stone angel statues that are just able to move when you're not looking at them.
Right.
Some fans really hated that, but I don't think that that's implied by the original. I think if you go back to Blink and you watch the way the angels move when they're not being observed, I mean, we don't see them doing the moving, but as soon as someone opens their eyes again, the angel's in a new position, and it's not just that the statue's closer to you. The statue has moved its arms and has opened its mouth and is baring its teeth and things like that. And that implies to me that, no, there is continuity between their statue bodies and what they're doing when they're not being observed, because otherwise you wouldn't get that menacing exit posture as soon as someone opens their eyes.
Right. I mean, the appearance is the same, but are they still... Like, because in this one, the Doctor literally says, explaining to Amy, that in the sight of any living creature, the angels literally cease to exist. They're just stone, and the ultimate defense mechanism. And Amy says, what, being a stone? And the doctor says, being a stone until you turn your back.
And I would interpret that to mean you can, I agree that's ambiguous. It could mean, they're not stone. I would interpret that to mean they're just a stone.
Right.
They're not capable of moving.
Okay. Well,
they're like Stone Boy from the Legion of Substitute Heroes until he powers up and learns self-hypnosis so he can move while he's asleep.
There you go. So we hear this scraping of, as stalking the soldier. He turns a corner. The angel attacks him, and then it imitates his voice through the radio and gets another soldier to come in and get attacked. Meanwhile, the doctor and Octavian and River and all the others are making their way, and one of the soldiers.
Oh, sorry, going back to the voice.
Yeah,
and that was flashed to the library, whereas the repeating.
Oh yeah,
come and see, right?
Who turned out the lights?
Who turned out the lights? Yes, which was a different phenomenon, of course, but that was ghosting. Again. But this is a throwback to that. I think it's a little bit of misdirection, isn't it? Like maybe Moffat writes that in to make us wonder what is that really? Is it is it ghosting again or something else? Yeah.
Also, Amy has sand fall out of her eye, which is creepy.
Yes, like a big pile of it. So one of the soldiers ends up shooting up one of the statues because he thought it moved, and he gets dressed down by Octavian. But of course,
he was right.
Might have actually moved. And we find out his name is Bob, Sacred Bob, which the doctor then says scared Bob, but scared is good. Scared keeps you alive.
Well, he says Bob is a sacred name, and so the doctor starts calling him Sacred Bob.
Yep.
And the others have names like Angelo and Christian or Crispin, and those are more classic saint names. I mean, there are Robert is actually a saint name. You have like Saint Robert Bellarmine,
right?
But the shortened form Bob is a little different, and I like the playfulness of by the 51st century there is a Saint Bob, not just a Saint Robert.
Yes. and he does assure him scared is good, scared keeps you alive, which kind of comes back to bite him. So
Charles Manson said that too.
That's a little scary.
I'm not kidding.
I know. So the doctor notes that the Applins who built the temple were good architects, that having had a ship crash into it from space. And he mentions that he had dinner with their chief architect once, and he had 2 heads. And that's when the doctor and River, if there's a little bit of dialogue, finally realized that all the statues in the maze have 1 head. Why would the Applins build statues with 1 head if they have 2 heads? Well, that's because all these statues in the maze must all be weeping angels.
Well, it took the doctor and River a little bit of time because he throws that out just like, oh yeah, he had 2 heads. It was great, but and talking about self-marriage and things like this, and also wait a second.
Yes.
Yeah, let's talk about the self-marriage thing for a moment. The doctor kind of rags on the church for saying then they started having laws against self-marriage. That's the church for you. No offense, Bishop.
Right.
And Father Octavian gets a great line. He says, quite a lot taken, if that's all right, Doctor.
Yes.
and
exactly.
and then Amy chimes in with, well, you must admit they have a point. I mean, the divorces would be rather messy.
Yes. Divorcing your own head.
Yeah. Also, there's an explanation as the doctor and River are berating themselves for why didn't we see this earlier? The doctor speculates low-level perception filter, or maybe we're just thick.
Right.
I'll go with the latter personally.
And so what they say is they realize that the Applins, who are all gone from this planet by now and replaced by 6 billion humans, must have been killed off by the angels. And then the angels were left starving underground for centuries with nothing to feed on. And so the loss of their form, because these statues they don't look like weeping angels. They look like just old, degraded statues, centuries old.
Really degraded.
And so that must have been part of their starvation. And then they realized that the weeping angel on board the Byzantium was not dormant, it was patient, and intentionally crashed it as a rescue mission to use the radiation to wake up an army of weeping angels, thus to take over the planet, the galaxy, the world, the universe, etc. So this is we've got the stakes here, the stakes of the episode. Now, Sacred Bob had been left behind to go catch up with Angelo and Crispin, I think, who had been by now killed by the angel, and he calls the doctor and Octavian on the radio, but of course it turns out it's not him. The angel killed him and stripped his cerebral cortex from his body and is using a version of his consciousness to communicate with the doctor, which is wicked creepy.
This is one of the for me, this is the creepy thing about this episode, is they're using his part of his cerebral cortex to talk to the doctor since they don't have a voice of their own.
And there's still his personality there and everything too, where he's like, "Sorry about that, sir."
Yes.
He's really polite and kind of vulnerable and humble, and it just adds to the creepiness.
And throws, and you mentioned earlier, but throws the doctor's words. "You said if I was scared, I would survive." Well, I didn't, did I, doctor?
And that makes him mad.
Yeah.
He also, it comes out in pieces. It's like, "Well, how did you survive?" "I'm afraid I didn't, sir." "Well, how did you die?" "He snapped my neck, sir."
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It wasn't as painless as I expected, he says.
What's that?
He says it wasn't as painless as he expected.
Yeah, that was great. I find this neck snapping, I'm kind of torn about the neck snapping, because the point in Blink was the Weeping Angels, the Lonely Assassins, they're the politest villains in the universe. They just move you into the past and let you live to death.
Right.
And here, that's not happening. They're not porting people to the past to feed on their temporal energy. They're snapping their necks. Now, I agree that in this kind of story, just teleporting soldiers into the past would not be as creepy as snapping their necks.
Right.
So it does serve the interests of this story to do the neck snapping, but it's inconsistent with what we've learned before. And even though they try to have a line of dialogue that kind of tries to explain it as, oh, well, they're focused on this other thing, so they're not sending people into the past, it really doesn't seem to work for me. It's inconsistent. It serves the needs of this story, but it's too inconsistent with what we've had before about the angel mythology.
Well, I thought it did work. Because it was the one angel, the angel that was on the Byzantium, that had crashed the ship to recover all these angels. He's the one that's running around talking on the walkie-talkies with Sacred Bob's consciousness, and it fit where he was doing this so that he could start communicating with the people there and basically getting them scared, getting them to that point where he'd be able, basically that's so that he could win. He would get his armies of angels going, and, oh, by the way, we're coming and you're going to get your next, that type of deal.
But everybody who dies in this, none of them are sent back in time for time displacement. Everyone is neck snap.
Yeah, whereas in Blink and in Angels Take Manhattan, it's all going back in time.
See, there's three of them that die, and then the rest of them are in the next episode with something else happening to them.
Well, Octavian dies the same way. Sorry.
Yeah,
spoilers.
that's true.
I got to say, I really like Octavian. He gets some good lines in these two episodes. Like at one point right here, the doctor says, everyone run. I'm coming. I'm sorry I called you an idiot, but there's no way you could have rescued your men. And Octavian says, I know that, sir. And when you've flown away in your little blue box, I'll explain that to your family, to their families. I mean, ouch.
Ouch.
So this is the point where they start running to get to the ship, to get out that way. They can't go back because the angels are behind them. But Amy has to stop, and because she's turning to stone. She looks down and her hand is stone. But the doctor says, no, you're not. You're not turning to stone. You're only being fooled by the angel in your head. And she tries to get him to leave her behind and save the others. So she's trying to do this selfless thing. But he gets her to move finally by biting her hand so she knows it's not stone. Oh, you bit me.
Rather clever way to do it. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Charlie bit me. That old viral video.
Mm-hmm.
So they and the creepiness here is effective because they have the flashlights, their torches keep blinking on and off because their power's being drained, and every time it blinks on and off, you see the statues moving closer and closer, and they're not right on top of them because these are the degraded statues that are they don't have their full power yet, so they're moving slowly. So they explain it that way. So they get right under the Byzantium, which is 30 meters above their head, or 30 feet, whatever, and they're trapped.
It's way more than 30 feet.
Yeah, it must be 30 meters. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're trapped here. There's no way out. The angels are coming down the corridors at them. And then the angel, we'll call him Angel Bob, gets the doctor mad by telling him that despite telling Bob it's okay to be scared, like we said before, died afraid, in pain, and alone, he trusted the doctor, and the doctor let him down. And the doctor realized they're trying to get him angry, so he'll make a mistake. But the doctor says they're the ones who made the mistake because you've laid a trap, but you left the doctor in it, and we get, you silly fool, the doctor's better than you, sort of moment here.
Well, it is played fairly nicely. And they're doing some important stuff here. They need to, because the ship is so far above them, and the angels are between them and the ship on the Maze of the Dead, there's no way for them to get up to the ship. So the doctor takes a gun from Father Octavian, a pistol, and he says, when I do the thing I'm about to do, and you'll know it when you see it, jump.
Right.
And Octavian is like, what? It's just take a leap of faith, Father.
Yes.
And so then the doctor has the speech about, this whole setup is a trap, but there's one thing you never want to put in a trap. Bob says, what's that? The doctor says, me, and shoots the gravity globe so it blows up.
Right.
End of episode.
And that's the end of episode. And so we'll pick up from there next time. What continues from there. Any last notes about this episode before I get a bit of feedback, listener feedback, but I want to get to. But any last notes on this episode, Father Cory?
One small thing when River's talking about the ship, says that it's a Galaxy class ship. That didn't look like the Enterprise to me, but
right.
I thought this was an effective, fast-paced episode. I enjoyed it. It's not Blink for me, but it is definitely a fun episode.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so we get a little bit of feedback here from our episode on Russell T. Davies and the 10th Doctor retrospective. We got a comment from Nancy Quarter on our website at sqpn.com, and she took some exception to some of our takes, so I hope we can respond to this effectively. She says, Dr. 9 again is dissed. The reboot could have failed miserably, but no, it attracted a new audience and saved Doctor Who. Give 9 some credit. Had an actor of, let's say, Peter Capaldi's ilk been chosen, who would have died a quiet death? Christopher Eccleston was instrumental in Who's successful rebirth. You seem more interested in his personal squabbles than in his performance. So let's talk about that part first, and then she also has a comment about what we said about Rose. Mm-hmm. I don't think we were necessarily dissing the Ninth Doctor, Christopher Eccleston. I thought some of his episodes, I think his performance was fine. I think some of the writing wasn't great.
I think we were more upset about the episodes themselves.
Yeah.
And, and we're pretty clear about that. It's not so much the actors themselves. I can't think of us ever saying, I really didn't like that actor's well, let me rephrase that. Colin Baker, we have said, at least most of us have said that he is not liked as the Doctor. But I don't think we've ever said that about Christopher Eccleston. And I think even when we did our ranking the Doctors, I think all three of us said we ranked him lower, but it wasn't because of Christopher Eccleston. It was because of the episodes that he had, the writing that he had.
Right.
And the amount of time he was on the show, we didn't have a chance to know him as well as some other doctors. I don't mind Christopher Eccleston's Doctor. I don't dislike him. He's just not, and it makes sense coming out of the Time War that he would be a bit moody. Fortunately, he's not as moody as Colin Baker or Peter Capaldi.
Right.
I think that's just an objective fact. He's not as happy as, say, David Tennant or Matt Smith most of the time. And I tend to gravitate to the happier doctors. So I don't dislike him. I just don't like him as much as some of the other doctors. And in terms of his personal struggles with the show, I don't hold that as a strike against him at all. If anything, I included, or to the extent I contributed to that discussion, it was to include mitigating factors. to help people understand what he was going through and how he was having to soldier on despite these difficulties. He was still getting the show made.
Yeah.
I think that's to his credit.
I think when we're talking in a retrospective on Russell T Davies' era, which we were, I think that's important to talk about because that's an important element in a showrunner's way of running the show. I think it says more about that's more a criticism of Russell T Davies than it is of Christopher Eccleston.
Yeah.
I mean, he has talked in recent years about how he was dealing with depression and other mental health issues at the same time. And that's to his credit that he was able to do as good a job as he did. And to the discredit of the people in the show's staff who kind of mistreated him, you could say.
Yeah, at some point, we'll probably do a retrospective of John Nathan Turner, who was, of course, the last one of the classic Who showrunners. And there's a lot there we can talk about that.
He made a lot of mistakes.
Behind the scenes stuff. And he made a lot of mistakes. Colin Baker,
right,
among others. So I mean, there's a lot there that we can talk about without dissing the doctors that were involved in it.
Yeah. And I don't even dislike Colin Baker. It's just he was given horrible writing to work with.
Yep. Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. Not a moment too soon. All right, and then the second part of Nancy's message, she says, also, Rose is vapid. She's a dropout who lost her dad, living with a single mom, scraping by. She's a teenager, for heaven's sake, looking for a job, finding her way. Give her a break. I have to say, I mean...
Is Rose a teenager?
I got the opinion she was more 20-ish.
Yeah.
22,
19,
somewhere in there.
20, yeah. But the thing is, I mean, I give her a break under those conditions, but the fact is they wrote her that way. I think that's the problem, is they shouldn't have written her that way. They should have, not put her in that position. I mean, frankly, when you compare her to Ace, who is of the same age and, thereabouts.
Similar background.
Right.
Similar background.
Ace comes off much less vapid at some points, much less vapid than Rose is. Rose gets better as she goes on, but especially that first season was tough.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between looking at it in terms of within the story. Within the story, yeah, Rose is the way she is because of the life she's led. That's totally understandable. She had a rough upbringing. She did grow up in a situation that didn't allow her to flourish the way she could with the doctor. That's the in-story explanation, and as an in-story explanation, it works just fine. But looking at it from outside the story, from the writer's perspective, does it make her a companion that resonates with people? Well, some people resonated great with her. I didn't resonate with her as much because, especially the way she starts out, she's whiny, and I don't like whiny companions. I don't like Perry as a companion. I mean, I like the individuals involved. I just don't like the way they're written. I didn't like Perry, who's whining all the time. I don't like Ryan, who's whiny all the time.
Right.
And I didn't like the early Rose, who was whiny all the time. And part of the reason that Rose is whiny is because in the Russell T Davies era, they're doing a thing where they're trying to deflate ordinary life in order to build up the doctor and make him seem like the most amazing thing ever. And it's in the service of doctor worship that they have to run down Rose's ordinary life, to where Rose herself is talking about, oh, it's just going to be, chips in the shop and things like that, and my life is so meaningless, just like yours, Mom and Mickey. And it's like, hey, I want to stand up for ordinary folks here.
Right.
Everybody's life has meaning, and you don't need to run down ordinary people to make the doctor look good.
Yes, I agree. But Nancy, thank you for your perspective, and thank you for your feedback.
Yeah.
We love it, even when folks, especially when folks disagree with us, because it makes for interesting discussion to get.
Yeah.
So
in fact, when I'm selecting feedback for Mysterious World, I automatically elevate the feedback where people are expressing other points of view, because those are important.
Yes. So thank you for that. All right, so let's wrap things up with, we want to thank our patrons especially. We want to take a moment to thank them for making The Secrets of Doctor Who possible, including Corey L., Jerry S., Armand P., Teresa C., and Susan B. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Doctor Who and all the shows at StarQuest, you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. We'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edits this show for us every week and takes out our flubs and mistakes so that you don't ever have to hear them. And so that's it from us. What did you think of The Time of the Angels, this first of a two-parter of the 11th Doctor? Let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com or the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page, or you can send us an email to doctorwho@sqpn.com. And like I said, we'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the second part of this two-parter called Flesh and Stone. Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing the Secrets of Doctor Who.
I'm glad to be here, and thank you, Dom.
Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Thanks, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest, and remember, I can run away from anything I like. Time is not the boss of me.
Right. This is going to be fun.